Hello there and welcome to our latest webinar, Recovering from a Stem Cell Transplant. My name is Karen Burnell. I'm one of the services managers here at Lymphoma Action. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Debbie, Sheldon, Amanda and John. John, you can't see John. He's had to dial in, I'm afraid. I'm going to ask them to briefly introduce themselves. But first of all, I'll come to Amanda to tell us a little bit about the types of stem cell transplants that you cover.
Hi, my name's Mandy. I'm the Autologous Stem Cell Coordinator in Southampton, University of Southampton Hospital, and I coordinate patients' pathways for patients that have their own cells collected and stored and then given back to them at a later date.
Thanks, Amanda. John?
Hi, my name's John Murray. I'm a nurse clinician working in the Christie Hospital, and I mainly work after allogeneic stem cell transplants, so people who've had a transplant from somebody unrelated, and that can be cords, siblings, or haplo transplants, or those that are unrelated from the donor panel registries.
Thanks, John. Debbie, I'll come to you.
Right. I was diagnosed and treated for follicular non-Hodgkin's at the end of 2019 into 2020, and then one area decided to be beastly and transformed to diffuse large B. So the pathway that was decided was I'd have another round of chemo, which did put me in complete metabolic response, but the stem cell transplant happened as well, followed by radiotherapy, but I'm 2.5 years out of treatment now.
Thanks, Debbie. And I'll come to you now, Sheldon.
Hi everyone, so I'm Sheldon. I had Hodgkin's lymphoma diagnosed in 2016. Sadly, I've relapsed twice, but I've had an auto stem cell transplant and an allo stem cell transplant, the auto being the first one and the allo being the second one. And like Debbie, I'm 2.5 years out of treatment now. So.
Oh, thanks very much, Sheldon. Now you'll see that I'm going to be looking down. I'm reading questions because I don't want to miss anything out. So in this webinar, we're going to focus on recovery from a stem cell transplant. So that's starting from the point of having received the stem cell transplant. However, we have received some questions about the process for deciding on having a transplant, which we're going to cover first. So looking first at the decision to have a stem cell transplant, I'm going to come to you, Amanda. Is the type of stem cell transplant that someone is offered dependent on their type or stage of lymphoma, or is there an element of personal choice about which to have, and what evidence will help with that choice?
Well, the auto route is normally offered for relapsed diffuse large B cells or follicular lymphoma, and it's normally first line for mantle cells or for CNS lymphomas. The auto pathway is certainly less has less toxicity than the allograft pathway. I say every decision is made along with the patient. It is offered. It's not something that's set in stone, but it is still considered the gold standard of treatment for a lot of lymphoma patients, and still very much something that is discussed with patients.
Right. So does age play a part in making any decisions about having a stem cell transplant, or which type is more appropriate for the individual?
Age these days is very much just a number. We always like to assess the patient. We do a certain amount of testing on patients, like heart function, kidney function, lung function. Also, it's very much dependent how patients have gone through their previous chemotherapy. If they've tolerated their previous chemotherapy, then they're quite often put forward for the autograft pathway. And again, it's very much a decision. If the patient is of the slight or older category, then we very much like to see the patient and see if they are fit enough to go through it, because it can be quite a rigorous process.
Thanks, Amanda.
It's certainly not taken lightly.
Okay, so John, I'm going to come to you. Is there a clinical reason for having one type of stem cell transplant over the other, and what is the evidence for this?
So it's very much dependent upon the disease type and where you are actually in your clinical history of response. So some people, it might be more beneficial for them to straight up front have an allogeneic stem cell transplant, that their disease has progressed either very rapidly, or they've not really responded to the first couple of courses of chemotherapy and got themselves into remission. And in those situations, often an auto transplant is probably not the most appropriate thing for them to have, because they probably would not respond to that. So these things are all taken in the context of how each individual is. So you can't say that one disease always has this and another disease always has that. It's more individualized even than that. So it's very much about how you're responding to your treatment at that particular time, and therefore it's worked out between yourselves and your clinical treating team which is going to be the right kind of treatment for you, and whether or not that indeed would be potentially even something like CAR T therapy rather than even an autologous transplant, or then an allogeneic stem cell transplant. So the options at the moment are quite open, and it's very much dependent upon how you are responding to that initial therapy.
Okay, so John, can you tell us about the different risks and benefits of the two different types of stem cell transplants?
Sure. So the risks are very much dependent upon the conditioning therapy itself. So it's a difficult one sometimes to get across, in that most people, when they're coming forward even for an auto transplant, have probably had a couple of cycles of chemotherapy before, and they're quite used to having a course of chemo. Your counts dip, you feel either tired, lethargic, you're bleeding or potentially bruising, you might need blood transfusions, GCSF support, nutritional support. But by and large, by the time the next cycle of chemo comes around, you've recovered to a state where you're able to have another cycle. And we treat people in up to 6 cycles of therapies. When you have your autologous transplant, if you said to somebody 6 weeks later, do you fancy doing your autologous transplant a second time, they'd look at you like you were completely crazy. It's a step up. An even larger step is then taking that jump really into doing an allogeneic stem cell transplant. The difference in the conditioning of the therapy is significantly stronger, and it lasts longer. So people feel more unwell for a greater time afterwards. So they would definitely think you were crazy if you offered them a second transplant 6 weeks later and said, you're used to having cyclic treatment. Why don't we do that again? It really is a step up. The way that we do it, we deliver different kinds of either combinations of chemotherapy and low levels of radiation. And it depends again on what your background disease group is. But the chemotherapy doses, even when you'll probably see things written like reduced intensity allogeneic stem cell transplant. Now, that's reduced intensity in comparison to a full intensity, but in comparison to somebody who's had standard lines of chemotherapy, it is a significant step up. And it often does take people several weeks, months, and even years in some instances to completely recover from an allograft.
Oh, right. The people who can't have a transplant.
There are people who can't, and again, that comes down to an individual assessment. So prior to your transplant, you'll have a batch of routine tests done that might include having a bone marrow aspirate and trophine performed, a series of routine blood tests. Depending on which hospital you're at, you'll have either an echo or some degree of heart assessment. You'll have lung functions performed, creatinine clearance to see how well your kidneys are working, and then a routine assessment of literally how fit you are in real time. So somebody will be looking at you and asking you questions about how you've coped with your previous lines of chemotherapy. And discussing how difficult this next step is going to be, and indeed if you want to do that, because this is a journey that we go on together. It's not something that we do to people. We do this with you, and we've all got to be reading really from the same hymn sheet at the beginning, saying this is going to be really tough. You've got to trust that we know what we're doing, and we're going to guide you through this process. But it is really, really going to be a very tough thing for you to go through, for both you, your family, your friends that are around you. You need all of those support networks in place, because having an allograft is not easy for anybody.
So what would you say success was with a stem cell transplant?
Well, of course, the ultimate success is getting somebody into a permanent remission. That, you're looking at somebody that's more than 5 years post their transplant with no evidence of disease, no recurrent infective complications, an absence of graft versus host disease, and back being a productive member of society. And whether that's going back to work, going back to school, or being with your friends and family, being with your grandkids, success is getting somebody through this whole process and getting them out the other side. You are going to be a different person no matter what. You will not return to the same person you were before your transplant. Things will have changed, some for the better, some for the worse. And that, again, is a journey that we all go on together, and we discover what is going to happen to you as an individual as you're going through this process, because it is different for everybody. We have a bit of a blueprint and say, this is the chemotherapy we're going to give, this is the plan that we have for you. But by and large, most people don't stick to a plan. Our bodies don't particularly like obeying pieces of paper where somebody's written on it, this is what you will do, and this is what you will do in 28 days, and this is what you'll do in 100 days. Our bodies rail against that, and you put drugs into us, and we all respond in a different way. And certainly we all engraft in a different way, and we all potentially have in different infective complications, and other things that are associated specifically around graft versus host disease in a post-allograft setting.
Thanks for that, John. We're going to move on now to recovery from a stem cell transplant. So I'm coming back to you, Amanda. Can you tell us about the likely steps in recovery for people having an auto stem cell transplant?
So the recovery sort of starts from the day after the cells are returned. We have the initial count recovery, or your blood count recovery, when you're in hospital, and that can take you through the neutropenic stage when your counts are at 0, and the complications that may be surrounded about that. You may be on some antibiotics and actually not feel that great, feel very, very tired, take to your bed, have side effects like diarrhea, sore mouth, etc. from the chemotherapy. But then as the counts start to recover, anytime from about day plus 11 or 12, and this is, so your stem cell return day is day 0, and you'll hear the doctors talking about day +1, day +2. From about day 11, day 12, we normally start to see counts starting to recover. Patients start to feel a little bit better in themselves. We get them clinically well in order to leave hospital, but then once they're at home, it's the physical recovery. So it's getting back their physical fitness and dealing with fatigue and getting themselves back to a state of normality, or the normality that or whatever they feel normal is for them.
Thanks, Amanda. So John, can you tell us about the steps in recovery for people having an allo stem cell transplant? And
sure.
How
I mean, it's very similar, but things are just a little bit more lengthy. And sometimes there's a little bit more wiggle room before your transplant. And by that, I mean there's a bit more time usually between the end of your cycle of chemotherapy that's got you towards your transplant and the actual process itself. And if there is an opportunity, this is a great place for people to try and get themselves as fit as they possibly can. So thinking about what you're eating, taking some exercise if you can do that, if you're feeling up to it, if your blood counts allow it, and actually if you've got enough energy to do it, because even after routine cycles of therapy, you are still going to feel quite tired. So it's whether or not you can get yourself as fit as you possibly can going into your allograft, so that throughout the process and then immediately post it, that recovery period hopefully is shortened a little bit. It's going to be slightly longer in that recovery, and as I said, just a few minutes ago, it can take people some months and even years to completely recover from an allograft. It is such an intense procedure.
Okay, thanks, John. Debbie, I'm going to come to you. You had an auto stem cell transplant. Can you tell us about your recovery, please?
Well, I think Amanda's just told you. Very, very, very much following that pattern. I did develop a minor infection, as I think my nurse that day said, or the doctor said, we don't get excited about things like this. They're so normal. So I was on antibiotics for a couple of days, but my counts were going up, and the consultant on his round said, "Oh, you're going to be going home in a couple of days." And I'm lying there thinking, "Don't be ridiculous." Or if I'm going home in a box. I just felt that awful, because I tried to build in a routine about getting up most days, but then there were just 2 days when I cannot move from this bed. But day 11 perked up, and day 13 my potassium had dipped, but otherwise I was going to be discharged then. So I mean, it's that quick a turnaround. But then getting home, it was the fatigue, I think, was the main thing. But I made myself, there wasn't a day when I stayed in bed, even if I only just struggled down to the city and put Netflix on. I moved, I showered, I got dressed, I got downstairs, and I just thought that was and people had said about doing that, and that would be a really, building a routine again, I suppose, really. And it was in lockdown, so it was a very strange time. I think one of the worst things was I couldn't stand tea. Now I live on tea, but so many things tasted wrong. When I sort of thought, I said to Chris, "I think I can cook tonight." That must have been about 2 or 3 weeks after I come. No, I'll cook tonight. And then, does this taste right? Because it tasted so wrong to me. No, that's absolutely fine. So there were weird things like that. Very dry mouth, very dry eyes. All of which, gradually worked through. I still have to be careful now, because if I overdo it, I really know about it. So I plan, when I know I've got a busy week, I plan where my rest times are going to be and things like that. And I think the one thing I've been left with is a lot of aches and pains. And that they're still going on, but I've had bone density scans and everything. So, things are okay, but my bones have taken a battering.
I think what you said there is really important about having a routine. I think that is the thing that some people can do really well and other people struggle with. And those that do it really well are in a situation as you describe, and it sounds as though you've got things really nailed down. That you're saying that if you've got a busy week coming up, you can plan things around that and around your fatigue. And I think that post-transplant, whether that is an auto or an allo, it really doesn't matter. It's getting yourself back into some kind of routine that for you becomes your new normal for a period of time, and whether or not that then changes and adapts over the months and years. But it's really important to crack back into something, because I say to people, once you go home, your new job, whatever your job was before, your job as soon as you go home is getting better, and that's all you've got to focus on, is getting yourself better. And whatever that is, and that however you make it to making yourself better is, do I make a cup of tea today and then a sandwich later, and do I walk to the corner shop to buy a pint of milk, do I walk the dog? It's doing those things every day and getting yourself into that routine of, my job is I get up, I eat, I take my tablets, I do some activity, repeat.
And it's setting yourself little goals as well. And if you don't meet that goal on that certain day, leave it for the next day. Don't try not to beat yourself up about it. It just doesn't matter. You will get there eventually. And everyone's individual, and some people it takes longer than others.
Definitely.
Well, I'm going to come to you now, Sheldon. So tell us a bit about your recovery from your allo stem cell transplant.
Well, going into my allo, I thought I was at a bit of an advantage, because I'd had an auto before, so I thought I was going to be aware of what was going to happen. Which, in essence, yes, everything went the same, but the intensity is a bit more, which it has to be. The difference for me from my auto was it was before COVID, so I was able to have my family around me. Then my allo was during COVID, so I had no visitors. And I think mentally I was prepared for that. But actually, when I was locked in my bubble, in my room, just seeing the nurses with their visors on, I think that was a big shock. And thank goodness we've got FaceTime, because it was the only way that I was able to speak to my parents and my partner. Yes, but it is hard, but it has to be hard to be able to get through it. And I'm 4 years out of our auto, and I'm 2.5 years out of allo. So yeah, and you do get infections, but that's because your immune system is so low. But yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, Sheldon. Next bit we're coming to is preparing for your transplant. So Amanda and John, I'm going to ask you this. I think I'll come to you first, Amanda. How do you talk to people about preparing for recovery from a stem cell transplant? And when do you start having that conversation?
I think you tend to start having that conversation straight away. I mean, obviously, the first time you meet the patient, you give them the information booklets, the lymphoma action. There's other bits of information that you can give them. But for me, because some of my patients are out of area, I'm not seeing them on a very regular basis. I only tend to see them whenever they come to their clinic appointments. But as soon as they're admitted to the ward, I find patients are asking me those types of questions as soon as they're an inpatient, because that's what they're focused on, is actually getting out the door at the other end. And we always do a formal discharge talk a day or so before they're actually discharged from hospital, but a lot of the topics that I'm covering in my discharge information and talk I've already covered with the patient already, because they've just asked me those questions. So a lot of preparation goes into actually getting the patient home, and lots of reassurance and just saying, just take it easy, take it at your pace. There's no rush. There's no expectations on what you should be doing 3 weeks from now, 4 weeks from now. It's whatever is right for you.
Okay, thanks, Amanda. John, can you add anything to that?
Not an awful lot, really. I mean, I pick patients up. I meet them for the first time upon their discharge. So our transplant team is the group of people that, and along with our apheresis practitioners, meet all of the patients pre their transplant. So there's a lot of written information that's given to people, both whilst they're being harvested, or coming in for clinic reviews, and during all their workup tests, their echoes and their lung functions, and all the blood tests they have backwards and forwards. So there's a lot of interaction with nursing staff and other allied health professionals. So I think, from a patient's perspective, use and abuse these people as much as you can. Ask them every question you can think of every time you meet somebody. It's like, okay, I want to know about this. If you got 5 minutes that, while you're taking my blood, can you tell me about, and whatever it is, ask people. And I think that it's really important to, open conversations and start talking to people as you're interacting with them yourselves. Because the worst thing you can do is turn up on day 0 and then think, oh crikey, I should have asked. It's too late then. It's too late. Your head's too far gone. You can't kind of comprehend about what is about to happen. You need to have all those conversations beforehand. So it's getting yourself really ready, physically and psychologically. As we've just been saying about being shut into a room. Around COVID, that was really difficult. But even in the post-COVID period, you're still shut in a room. It's just that you've got people that can now come and visit you, but then most places have got some restrictions on how many people you can have in and how often. So you are still locked away, and you feel as though you're physically locked away in a room for up to, in some cases for the allograft, 6 weeks that you could be an inpatient for. So, getting your head in that space beforehand and asking people, how long do you think I'm going to be in? I know you can only give me a ballpark, but once you've got that in your head, you think, right, I'm going to be in hospital for this long. What can I bring with me? How do I entertain myself? What do I do to occupy my time? How do I set myself a routine? I know you're saying before about not being able to get out of bed for a couple of days. And, that will happen at some point to most people, that you feel so unwell, you literally can't do anything. How are you going to get your head ready for that when that happens and think, well, actually, everything isn't going wrong. This is normal. They told me that for a few days I'm going to feel absolutely dreadful, but then I'll get through it as my counts recover and I'll start feeling better again. Oh, yeah, I remember somebody told me that. right, okay, I can cope with this for the next few days because I know there's a light at the end of this because somebody told me it. So it's just interacting with everybody that you meet when you're being harvested. Talk to the guys on the machine. Say, tell me a bit about my transplant. What's going to happen to my cells? Where do they go? How do they get frozen down? What happens when they come back and they're defrosted? And what's the process for putting them back in? And it's learning about what's going to happen to you because it's very individual. We as nurses, doctors, and all the other professionals that are looking after you, we've done this hundreds and thousands of times. This is by and large your first time that you've had it done. So it's all a bit scary and a bit new. But ask us, keep asking questions. I don't think there's anybody that minds being asked 10 questions every time you meet somebody. It's what we're here for at the end of the day.
Thanks, John. Sheldon, I'm going to come to you now. Were you given any guidance about how to prepare for your transplant and what might help you to recover from the transplant?
The information that I got from my health board, which was the Cardiff and the Vale, because I was treated in South Wales, was absolutely amazing. They just took you through every single step, and like John said, even going down to making sure that you had what you wanted in the room to entertain you. But that would be the thing that got me through it. The bit for me is I love sour sweets, so I made sure I had a bit of a supply of sour sweets to get me through. That I knew I could tolerate. With all the chemotherapy that I had, like Debbie, my taste had gone. I couldn't tolerate a lot of squashes. I couldn't tolerate a lot of drinks. So I had to find a drink that I could tolerate for the entirety of my transplant. Which was very hard when I'd gone through so many taste changes, metallic and my taste changes anyway. So, but the team got me through it and they gave me everything that I needed to make sure that I had to make the right decisions. But you see all different types of people, nutritionists, pharmacists, all the part of the team. So you are very much guided.
Thanks, Sheldon. Debbie, tell us about your experience. Were you given any guidance?
Yeah, beforehand, yes, by the transplant team, because I sort of moved from lymphoma to haematology, and then obviously I'm back with lymphoma now. So they gave me all the lymphoma action literature like they should, but literally taught me through it, and almost like, don't read this page yet. You don't need to know this yet. But all that sort of guidance. And I also found, and the day of apheresis was, it was a nurse that I got to know quite well during chemo, and obviously you're with the same person basically all day apart from lunch break or tea break, because it did take that long to get them out of me. But it was fascinating, and she was talking me through what was going on then, what was going to happen. So I felt I went in with eyes wide open, and I think that's important. And then with the tips about making sure that when I went into hospital that I had all these sorts of things with me, and obviously those are the sorts of things that we've put on the Facebook page and on the website now. Those tips are so useful because that's what gets you through. And I also felt being locked down, some of the nurses were definitely, it wasn't time for bloods, it wasn't time for any medication. Literally, they were checking up on you because they knew nobody else was going to be coming in to do that role. And I really, really appreciated that. They just came in. I said, oh, it's not, no, just come in for a natter. And that human touch in a very strange time really, really helped.
Yeah.
And like Amanda said, there was lots of information on discharge as well.
Thanks, Debbie. You mentioned there the top tips. So we collated top tips from all our closed Facebook group members, and so on the website we now have top tips for stem cell transplants, and that's what you were alluding to there. So do have a look at that. The next thing we're going to talk about is your physical recovery from transplants. I have been listening to you, and I think you've probably hit on some of these points, but I'm going to go ask them again because I've got my list and I don't want to miss anything out. So I'm just going to come to you. What is the possible physical impact of a transplant, and what can people do to help prepare themselves for it?
Like John said, just to make sure that in the gap between your final chemotherapy and coming in for your transplant, that you can either try and get as physically fit as possible, and I don't mean going out for a run or anything like that, but just getting plenty of fresh air, exercise, having a good diet, and just generally just keeping your well-being really good in that phase, and making sure that you're in the best physical condition coming into your transplant. Now, I appreciate that that's not always possible depending on the regimen that you've had prior to coming in. And then on discharge, it's just a case of just taking it day by day and just doing what you can, but just trying, like Debbie said, to try and get into a routine, to try and do a little bit of exercise, or just even if it's just a case of just walking around the garden just for 2 or 3 minutes, and then maybe just extending that daily basis, weekly basis, whatever you can manage, and also just trying to build yourself up really gradually. I think a lot of patients get lulled into a false sense of security when they're in their room, that they've only had to walk to their bathroom and back, and they don't realise that they haven't been up a flight of stairs for 2 or 3 weeks, and suddenly going home and having to go upstairs to the bedroom. By the time they get up the top of the stairs, they're absolutely exhausted. Or even just that day of discharge, getting in the car, getting out the car, getting in the house, they want to wander around, see all the rooms that they haven't seen for three or 4 weeks, or 6 weeks in terms of an allo patient. And it's trying not to overdo it too quickly, and try not to run before you can walk.
John, can you add anything to that?
Oh, no, absolutely. It is a case of taking very small steps, and I can't remember who said before about not beating yourself up and setting targets that are too high. And it's being sensible with these things, that you've just been in a room for anywhere between 2 and 6 weeks, not travelled more than 3 or 4 steps to the bathroom and the bed and back. You're not going to go home and run a marathon next week. It's just not going to happen. So, work that into your daily routine, that you are going to, walk up to the bathroom that's upstairs. If you've got an upstairs and a downstairs bathroom, avoid the downstairs one. Force yourself to go to the upstairs one and go up and down those stairs, and start getting some fitness back into yourself. Walking backwards and forwards to the corner shop, walking the dog a little bit further each day. It's just doing those things that are slow and gradual, that all of a sudden in a month's time you think, crikey, look, I'm getting back towards my normal self. I can do things again. I'm not just stuck inside a little room. You do find that after the allograft, there's a bit of a honeymoon period that most people go through in those first 2 weeks. You've been stuck in this room for a long time. You get out, and I don't know if Sheldon, if this happened to you, that you get home and everything is absolutely fantastic, and you try and rush around for those first 2 weeks, and then come the 3rd and the 4th week, you come into clinic, and most people sit down and go, I am exhausted. I don't know what's happened, but something's going wrong. And you're like, no, nothing's going wrong. You've just been doing too much too quickly. Slow down. And a couple of weeks later, they sort of go, oh, yeah, I realised I was doing too much. And it's a very common thing. We get excited that, I think my transplant's done and that's it. I've gone home. I'm going to recover straight away, even though everybody's told me it's going to take a while. I'm going to be different, and I'm going to be fine, and I'm going to crack on and start running couch to 5K next week. That's not realistic. And people come in and go, blimey, yeah, it's really not the stuffing out of me, this. I don't know, Sheldon, is that a thing that happened to you, or are you more sensible?
No, that's a true reflection, really. Before going into any treatment, I used to work so many hours a week. I was very independent. But going through this, it made me realise, actually, I do need people around me, and don't be afraid. Never say no. If someone's offering to help you, take the help, because during my allo, it was COVID. I had to move away from my house with my partner because my partner worked in a care home. So we made it the right decision that I moved my parents. So that was a extenuating circumstances for us, and we felt that it was the right thing to do. and those are the type of decisions you might need to make, unfortunately. But we're not in COVID times now, so.
Thanks for that. John, you asked Sheldon my question there, so thanks for that. So I'm now going to come to Debbie and ask you, Debbie, was there any lasting physical impact of your treatment?
I think it's the aching bones, but is the more thing. And my dentist keeps telling me there's absolutely nothing wrong with my mouth, but it never feels like, it doesn't feel like my mouth anymore. Everything tastes like it should, so obviously that bit's all working. But I could brush my teeth, and 10 minutes, did I brush my teeth this morning? It never feels, you know, that squeaky clean, fresh feeling. I think that's something I miss, but yeah, small price to pay. But one of the things that I just found really useful, and I've still kept it up, I think I'm on volume 3 now, is I kept a diary right from the very beginning, right from when I was first diagnosed. And low days, it's really good to look back on that, and you said you think you feel low today. But it's also prompts you with questions and everything like that, and sometimes looking back on it, you know, it's, oh, is that a new ache, is that a new pain, and oh no, I felt like that and they said it was that, and so you can check back, and if it is, no, that is new, then you call someone. But yeah, that I think mentally helps me, because I still log now, you know, I still normally only around appointments, but I just put that in there. And obviously certainly all during the stem cell transplant, you know, I managed, sometimes the writing looks fairly feeble, but I managed to write in it every day.
I think we need to make sure that's on the top tips. That's a brilliant tip. Thanks, Debbie, for that. I am now going to come back to you, Amanda and John, with a couple of specific questions. And John, you actually touched on this about that exhaustion when somebody comes back into clinic a few weeks later. So I'll stick with you. How long might fatigue last following a transplant, and what might help?
I think, as Debbie's mentioned, you know, 2.5 years out and still feeling fatigue, and it's a bit of a movable feast, in that some people 6 months after their transplant are literally back full blast, and off they go. I've got one fella who, you know, the end of his, just before he was a year, I think it was about 11 months post his transplant, he went and ran an ultra marathon. Now, that is not a normal thing for most people to do, let alone after you've had an allogeneic stem cell transplant. So some people recover remarkably well and are as fit as they were before, whereas some other people, like Debbie has described herself, that she has to plan. If she's got a particularly busy week, you have to think, right, what am I going to do? I've got this much energy, and this much energy will get me through the day. How do I parcel that up so that I get to the end of the day and I'm not completely on my knees? And you know, what I talk to people about is having, you know, clean sleep, a good diet, you know, not drinking too much, obviously not smoking, and taking some physical activity. Because when you're feeling fatigued, the first thing you think, oh, right, I need to take more rest. Now, all the studies out there show that that's probably the wrong thing to do, that you should do some activity. It doesn't have to be, again, running a marathon, but it's doing some physical activity to stress your body to get it used to being tired from doing exercise rather than being tired from all of the treatment that you've had. So you do need to be active for a period of time each day, and depending where you read, it can be anywhere between 20 minutes and an hour. So if you hit that sweet spot somewhere around 30 minutes of activity, and whether that is just a walk, that is okay. It's something that you need to get a little bit out of breath. So it's not that you're puffing away, but it's enough that you'd get back from that walk and you'd think, oh, right, if I was to sit next to somebody that I didn't know, would they look at me and go, well, you're a bit sweaty? You know, a little bit of a dab on the forehead, and you think, all right, I probably need to go and have a shower after that. So it's that amount of exercise that you're just getting a little bit on the edge of, just a bit out of breath and just a little bit sweaty. So it's not even jogging or running, it's just a brisk walk. And if you do that every day, that is really helpful for helping fatigue.
We've just had a question come in, actually. Somebody's asked, is there a special online exercise class like apparently the Lung Foundation have a weekly class. I would imagine, is it all right for people to do online exercise classes?
Absolutely, absolutely. I actively encourage people to be as active as they can after their transplant and getting back into doing some form of physical exercise. It's difficult immediately post because you're on things like cyclosporin and some of the other immunosuppressions. So that makes you a little bit more vulnerable to infections. So I say, wait until we've got you off some of these, or you're on a really lower dose, so that your chance of picking up opportunistic infections is reduced. But even taking full dose things, you can do things on your own. You don't necessarily need to go to classes, but you can do things that would be online, even when you're on full doses of cyclosporin. So, it's something that you want to incorporate back into your life again, and it's all about moving towards normality. And it's not doing it too quick, but just doing it.
Okay, thanks for that. Now, Debbie mentioned specifically changes in mouth and with a taste. So I'm going to come to you for this one, Amanda. If people experience appetite changes, why might this be, and what can help?
Most of the time it's just down to the chemotherapy and the fact that the chemotherapy causes breakdown of the cell linings, and it is a very, very common side effect, taste changes within the mouth. It's very, very common within the first week of treatment. It may be it's slightly longer for the allograft patients, but for the autograft patients, majority of my lymphoma patients, when they're discharged from hospital, have actually got a certain degree of taste back, but some patients haven't. And again, it's very individualistic, and it can sometimes take patients an awful lot longer to regain their taste. And I've had reports of patients saying that different tastes come back at different times. So sometimes citric tastes come back, and then they can taste sweet things. Salty taste comes back, and then something else disappeared. And it's just a case of just trying to manipulate your diet a little bit in order so that you can try to enjoy your food.
Yeah,
just
okay,
forward.
That's interesting. Yeah. So Amanda, I'll stick with you for the next question. Is there any impact on sexual health following a stem cell transplant, or any guidance around the use of hormonal contraceptives or HRT for the symptoms of menopause?
So there can be some impact on sexual health, mostly around fatigue, because most patients are very, very tired. Sometimes initially following transplant, we need to monitor platelet count, etc. as well, and we do advise that patients use contraception going forward, especially for infection purposes, etc. I think if patients are struggling around sexual health, they should always speak to a member of their team. If they need to have referral to a specialist teams, then that either the consultant that they're under will be able to refer them within that.
Okay, because we've also had a question in about the use of hormone-based vaginal lubricants after transplant. Would you suggest that as well for them to speak to?
Yes, yes, definitely. Okay. Yeah, definitely. And I hope that it's something that when they're having their follow-up consultations, I'm hoping it's something that either the patients are bringing up or otherwise the consultant is discussing with the patient, because it's all part and parcel of their recovery process.
Okay, we've got one more question. I'm watching the time, so we've got one more question on this section. Can you tell us a bit about the need for vaccinations, including MMR, following a transplant? Amanda?
So we have quite a regimented vaccination programme here in Southampton. At the moment, it's normally about 3 months post-transplant for flu vaccines and for COVID vaccines to restart, and patients will go back to number one and have their full course of vaccines again. And normally about 11 to 12 months post-transplant, then we revaccinate them against some of their childhood vaccines. We don't tend to revaccinate against MMR post-autologous transplant, but they do have polio, tetanus, etc. Those vaccines again.
Okay, thanks for that. Our next section is around family, friends and carers. And we know that families and friends can be a huge support for many people going through the transplant, but can also, it can be challenging for them to understand the impact of the treatment on the individual and the time it can take to recover. So I'm going to come to you, John, for this one. How are family and friends involved in the process? How are they able to support someone during and after their stem cell transplant? And do you have a role in managing their questions and expectations about recovery?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think, you know, as I mentioned right at the beginning, it's really important that friends, family are actively involved. This isn't something that you can do on your own. You do need support around you. So bringing people along to consultations and having that extra pair of ears to listen to what's been said, write it down, take notes, chat about it when you get home, and then when you come into your next consultation, bring some questions with you saying, oh, I know you told us this last time, can you just confirm what you meant by that, or asking additional questions. So I think that from the relative and friends and family perspective, it's really important that you're part of this whole process. Because you are going to be the person at home. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, and you turn over and your partner's got a temperature, and you say, all right, we need to phone the hotline or you know, whatever service it is that you got at your hospital, and they go, oh no, I'm all right. No, don't you remember? We were given this number and we have to phone. So if you're all reading from the same page again, it makes life easier, and then you all know exactly what's going to happen every time something happens throughout the whole transplant. And it's having all those people around you all the time. I think that's really important. I'm, you know, always making sure that, you know, people in consultations when we're seeing them after the transplant know exactly what's going on and who to call, what to do, what to look out for. Because the relative or the friend or whoever it is who's with the patient at home is physically looking at them. Like we are as health professionals, you're looking at somebody. You as the person going through it, you're looking outwards. So you're seeing all these things happening around you. But if somebody's looking at you and going, oh, you look a bit yellow, or, oh, you've got a funny rash on your forehead, you're not necessarily going to see that yourself because it's your forehead, you know, unless you stare in the mirror all day. So it's having all those people around you thinking, somebody told me we've got to look out for a rash and I can see one on your face. Should we phone somebody and ask them what to do? Or I've noticed the whites of your eyes have gone a bit yellow since yesterday. Should we give somebody a ring and see if that's something that we need to be worried about? So it's having those people on board and knowing the process of what's happening and who to contact when you need to contact them.
Right, thanks, John. So Sheldon, I'm going to come to you. What sort of help and support was available or would have been helpful for you from family and friends?
I don't think my family and friends could have done any more, really. They were able to come with me to all my appointments to understand what I was going to go through, which I think was very important for them to understand what I was going to go through. But my partner and my parents would be, have you taken medication? But that's what you need to remember, because you're taking so many tablets at so many different times of the day. You do need someone to say to you, right, stop, have you taken tablets yet? Or have you done this? Have you done that? Because that will be part of your recovery. Taking all your tablets, if you don't take all your tablets, that will be part of your recovery and you'll end up going backwards. But taking all your tablets at the right time on the days you need to take them, because there are certain tablets you take on certain days, which would blow your mind. But if you had someone that was well, that is normal, they can help you and guide you through that.
Thanks, Sheldon. Debbie, have you got anything to add?
No, I was just that obviously mine was in lockdown and it was the saving graces. We had all these various FaceTime groups. We'd meet up for quizzes and all of that, which I know half the country was doing, but I would have had to have done anyway. And friends were just making such an effort to reach out that was absolutely amazing. And my husband and daughter just held everything together here. She moved home because she was working from home. So she thought, well, if I come here, there's loads I can do. And, you know, well, in fact, I got home because they did complain I got well too quickly because they were in the middle of decorating the lounge when I was discharged. And they were banking on having me away for another week. But it was that sort of thing. Oh, yes. Yeah.
Well, thanks very much for that. So the final section here is about the emotional impact and support. So Amanda, I'm going to ask you, how do you prepare people for the possible emotional impact of a stem cell transplant?
I think just making sure that you're there for them, you're answering any questions. If they have any concerns, that you answer them in a timely manner. You give lots and lots of reassurance, and just making sure that the patient is as well informed and going into the process as possible, making sure they've got the information, and also making sure that their network, again, friends and family, are up to speed as well, and they've got that support. I mean, we all have the clinical support and things like that to offer the patients. We have psychologists attached to clinics, etc., to give that side. But sometimes it's just the emotional support from their family, and as long as the family know what the patient is going through, hopefully they can get. It's a really holistic approach for them going through their transplant.
Yeah, John, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I suppose the major difference really from the auto and the allo outlook is around that risk of having the transplant and how much riskier it is, and emotionally that can be quite difficult conversations to have with people in that pre-transplant setting when people are being referred through for consideration. Those conversations can be really, really difficult for both the patient and their immediate family who will come along to those consultations with them. So, you know, the risks are significant within transplant, and some people don't make it out of the transplant process within those first 100 days. And being made aware of that up front it can be really distressing, and emotionally that takes a bit of a toll on people. That, you know, sometimes they get out the other side and think, oh crikey, well, I've made it through there, but I made a friend with somebody in clinic and I know they were having a transplant around the same time as me and they've not made it. And that can be really difficult. And I think as professionals, we need to recognize that, you know, it's not just you going through it, and that you have made acquaintances, friends, and sometimes really deep friendships with people in the clinic rooms that you're with. And we need to see, okay, I know that so-and-so, you know, is not here today. Do you want to talk about that? And, you know, as Amanda said, there are psychologists and teams around to help us with that when people do struggle. So it's a large thing to take on any kind of transplant, auto or allogeneic, and the risks are quite significant and should be really discussed in detail with you by your teams before anybody goes forward to have any kind of transplant, really.
Thanks for that, John. So Debbie, I'm going to come to you with a final question here. Do you feel that having lymphoma and having your treatment, including a stem cell transplant, had a psychological impact? And if so, what helped?
I think it definitely has. I don't really think anybody can be, you know, when you have that diagnosis, various things happened at that happened at the same time. I lost my father, then I lost my mother. So it's all been quite a roller coaster really for me. I think I'm lucky in that I have a strong faith. I think that really helped me. At times I felt I'm not experiencing this, I'm just being carried through it. And so that obviously helped. But it was the people around, and then appointments during COVID. Chris would be on WhatsApp chat, so he was in a way in the room, so he could ask whatever questions he wanted to ask. But I know it's hard, because I know at times he feels he's sort of struggling with almost being overprotective now. You know, well, I'm going off, and, you know, a crowd of us are going off, and I'm going on a crowded train, and even though I've been really lucky and I've got through the whole lot, apart from that tiny little infection in hospital, you know, nothing's hit me. I mean, COVID twice, in a very minor way, really. So I've just gone back out there, and I know at times he sort of thinks, oh, should she be doing this? And it's that. I think it's had more of an effect on him maybe than me.
Okay. And Sheldon, can I ask you the same question?
I think it does, but the support that you get pre and post from my health board was amazing. I think, I don't know whether Debbie would think the same way, But when you're going through a transplant, you're dreaming of, I'm going to be back to normal and I can't wait for when that will be. And then suddenly you're ringing the bell saying that you finished your treatment and you're out on the world on your own. And actually, you miss going to the hospital every other day for treatment. You miss having that rapport with the nurses. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I had to deal with. But having that conversation with your CNSs, having that conversation with your nursing team, because if you don't talk about it, you're not going to make it better. So I think that was the biggest thing for me. And from an outsider looking in, thinking, how could you say it? How could you say that? You know, having any more treatment, but actually, it's been a massive part of my life. 6 years, 7 years of my life, and then suddenly you don't go back to the hospital every day. It's massive. So.
Thanks, Sheldon. Well, we are coming up to time now, but got one more thing for you all. Maybe in a sentence or two, I'd like your take-home message. So maybe, Amanda, have you got something?
Just make sure that you get all the information that you can, and I say it's an individual decision. Don't feel that you're ever pressured into anything.
Thanks, Amanda. John, what's your take-home message?
Mine would be, when you get home, eat, drink, take all your tablets, and do some activity.
Fantastic, thank you. And Debbie?
I'd echo John, but I'd also again say keep a diary.
Yeah, good tip. And Sheldon?
When you're going through treatment and you think times are hard, things will get better.
Great stuff. I think we've got some great messages there. So for everybody watching this, don't forget we've got the top tips on the website. We've got loads of information on the website, so really do have a look. So that leaves me just to thank our panelists for joining us today. Thanks, Amanda, John, Debbie and Sheldon. And that's it. Thanks all. Goodbye.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.